Hi there, it's Gabrielle Nicolay from SpeechKids. I'm a speech language pathologist, speech therapist with 2 decades of experience serving young children and their families. We teach little kids to talk, and we teach their children, they teach their parents to understand them better. And we've been doing a series called Why Do They Do That? And today we're going to talk about pretty much my favorite developmental stage, dump and fill. And part of the reason I love it is because it's so descriptive, the name, because it says exactly what your child is doing, which is they are dumping things out and filling things back up. And there are lots of different reasons why I love this developmental stage, and I'm going to go through a couple of them with you. And then I want to give you a couple of tips for making peace with the dump and fill stage. It's not so much the filling up that bugs us as parents, it's mostly the dumping. And so we'll talk a little bit about ways to help your brain embrace the dumping part as well. So what is dump and fill? Dump and fill is a developmental stage that happens when kids are somewhere between 12 and 24 months. This is like squarely in their first round of like independence seeking. They can walk, they are maybe talking a little bit, they've got control over their extremities. And if you watched previous videos in this series, you know that control over your extremities leads to control over the environment. And so what happens when you can pick things up and let them go is you want to do a lot of that because you got to practice it. Because if you are new at it, then you've got to do it a bunch of times. So this is where it gets sort of interesting for adults, because as adults, we don't really remember a time, number one, where we weren't good at picking things up and letting them go. But we have done it, in fact, probably, several million times by the time we become parents. And so, but if we unravel all of that, there was a first time and then there was a second time, and we had to get to mastery, if you will. And if you subscribe to Malcolm Gladwell's work, then you know that it's about 10,000 repetitions before we've got mastery. I think probably in the case of typical child development, at least 10,000 hours, 10,000 times, 10,000 hours, I think it is probably not required to gain mastery of sort of the basic skills that we want our kids to have. But it's worth remembering that it takes a little while. So, but I wanted to get back to what's actually happening when we are in this dump and fill stage. It basically means, right, anything, anywhere, and any container of any size can be filled up with any other thing that's in the environment, and then dumped out. So where does this happen first? Usually in the bathtub. You probably have some kind of cup in the bathtub, or maybe you have a bunch of bath toys, and you notice that your child is filling up the cup and dumping it out, and filling it up and dumping it out. And they can probably be there for how long? 20 minutes? 30 minutes? 50 minutes? A long, long time. And it doesn't get old for them. It gets old pretty quick for us, right? Because we know how that works. We know it's going to be the same every time. We know how to do it. We know how much force, how much pressure, how much speed is required in order to get the stuff in and out of the container. But your little one doesn't yet. Your little one doesn't know that 65 marbles won't fit in the little container, but 30 of them will. Your little one doesn't know that cramming dirt into a container with a hole in it means it's going to fall out. They're still experimenting with all of this stuff. And so when they are pouring that water into the bathtub and out of the bathtub, and maybe they're even pouring it on the floor of the bathroom, just to see what happens. What happens when, right? And so bathtub is where it happens. In the kitchen, if you give them a Tupperware, they will fill it with any small little objects they can find. They will fill it with hair on the floor if that's what they find. And while, you may think that that's kind of gross, and so do I, but to them, again, life is a science experiment, right? They are going to fill up these containers and then they're going to dump them out. And they are going to do this repeatedly because they are learning about, call it physics if you want. They're learning about the world, about the rules of the world, and about how they are controlling it. And this is the other piece of the dump and fill, which is so fun, which is your child is like experiencing mastery over their environment. And the reason I say that with like such a big grin on my face is to mirror the feeling that of empowerment and control and delight that they have in doing that, right? Think about being a baby, you have control over nothing. And gradually, bit by bit by bit, you start to gain control over some things. And, even an 18-month-old, a 24-month-old has almost no control over their environment, except in this one area. This is like a notable exception where they can fill things up and dump things out. But I wanted to, again, because number one, these periods of dump and fill can last like longer than we as parents maybe are interested in them lasting. And because we are so practiced at choosing the cleanup part or the fill up part versus the dumping out part, there are some things that happen, and we tend to not like this very much as adults. So as adults, we can get a little bit upset when we see our child knocking things over. And by the way, that's like a continuation of this dump and fill, which is I build something and I knock it over, and I build it again and I knock it over. And we can have sort of a visceral reaction to the knocking over or the dumping out, because I think, number one, our culture tells us that we're supposed to be neat and tidy, and our houses are supposed to look like, all the houses on HGTV. But also because somehow we've internalized this idea that we need to be clean and neat and tidy in our personal appearance as well, in our just sort of in the way we go through the world. And that's all fine if you've already experienced, if you've already had direct experience with the world, but your little one hasn't. And so they need to get messy, they need to get dirty, they need to make a mess in order to learn. And so if you can remember that, if we can remember that as parents, where it's in fact our child's job to make a mess, and then our job to help them sort of navigate cleaning it up or figuring out what their place in that mess is, then maybe we can take some of the stigma, some of the anxiety, some of the wrongness out of the dumping part of the dump and fill. They're just two sides of the same thing. It's the yin and the yang, right? You can't have one without the other. Your child can't learn about being neat without learning first and also how to be messy. And it's super important that we allow them to experience that. And here's another thing about that, which is at some point they will actually internalize a message of that dumping is wrong, that messiness is bad, that messiness or a mess is undesirable. At some point they will listen to you instead of listening to their internal sense of what it is that they want to experience and what they want to do. And